Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third episode of Coffee Talk. My name is Ryan, and I'm here with my buddy Alex. And we have a couple topics to speak to you about today. We're going to be talking about grinders, all different types of grinders and different grinder build materials. And also the second topic is going to be about freshly roasted beans. So how long do freshly roasted beans actually stay fresh for? So sometimes you buy freshly roasted beans from the market, and you're actually not sure how long they will stay fresh for to get the maximum and optimum flavors from your coffee bean. So Alex, how are you today?
Hey Ryan, I'm good, thanks. And you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Again, it's late night here and early morning over in London for you.
Yep.
Have you had your coffee yet?
Actually not, and I'm actually just waiting for my machine to warm up. So
Okay.
maybe once my machine's warmed up, then I'll make a cup.
Excellent, excellent. All right, I haven't had a coffee today actually at all, so I'm kind of, I don't know, it feels like I'm missing a little bit of something today.
Something special.
That's right, something just doesn't feel right today, and it's not about the caffeine. I don't really feel tired. It's just, you just get so used to drinking coffee every day and enjoying it that once one day you don't have it, it's feels like something's missing. So that's when you truly know that you're really into coffee.
Yeah, but it's like, well, you're not driven by the caffeine, but rather than the taste and the actual process of making it.
That's right. So yeah, let's dive into our first topic. We kind of brainstormed and we came up with this topic to talk about related to coffee, and we thought that it would be a really good topic to speak about because grinders are kind of a fundamental piece of equipment when people who want to brew coffee at home. You're going to need a coffee grinder to ground your freshly roasted beans or beans that you buy whole from wherever you get your beans. So I know, Alex, you've had quite a few, well, not that many grinders, but you've had some nice grinders and you have some maybe more versatile mobile grinders. So we'll talk about those, and also we'll talk about the different types. We got blade, we got burr grinders, and we have so many different type of materials that burr grinders are made out of, and we can talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of each. So to start off, why don't we kind of go through the different types of coffee grinders? Well, how about coffee grinders that you have owned?
Sure. I think probably I'll start with. So I think I'll start with the blade grinder. So I have owned a blade grinder. So it was just a very normal, cheap thing that has two blades on it, and it just spins. Yeah, so I used that after when I started using breed grounds, and yeah, so all that my blade grinder did was it just grinds because it uses blades. So what a blade grinder does, it just cuts up the bean, and that's it, rather than crushes it like a burr grinder does. So a blade grinder, it just cuts up the bean into little pieces for however long you run the grinder for. Yeah, so I had that for quite some time until I got my first burr grinder, and it was DeLonghi. It was a DeLonghi burr grinder. I don't quite remember the size of the burrs, but it was quite a while ago. Yeah, and it seemed to do a good job. But then back then I had a machine with a pressurized portafilter, so the grind size didn't really quite matter. So I didn't know. So back then I didn't know that it wasn't able to grind as fine. Then afterwards when I stopped using pressurized portafilters, and then I realized that this DeLonghi grinder couldn't grind fine enough. And so, yeah, so my shots were coming out too fast, never too slow. And so, yeah, so the one time I just went into a coffee shop, I consulted I consulted the advisors there, and he just said, "Yeah, I'll give you a sample." So he fine grinded. So he grinded me some coffee, and I brought it home. So it was fine. It was just fine enough. So he sealed the packet just to not let it go stale. And then afterwards, the shots were a lot different. So yeah, so the shots came out just right, but the coffee was still stale because it has been a few hours. So then that just shown that, yeah, so my DeLonghi grinder wasn't adequate enough. And so then afterwards, I got myself an entry level Burr grinder. So the name of it was an Arboretal MC2. So it's a conical grinder, and again, I forgot the size of the burrs, but it's but it had stainless steel and burr grinder. So it has stainless steel burrs, and it did quite a good job in terms of delivering the coffee grinds and the quality in the cup. Then after that, I upgraded to my Matza Super Jolly, and that was more of an entry level commercial grinder. So it's a step up from the Matza Mini. So most commercial places would start off with a Super Jolly because the Mini is more aimed at the domestic end users. So the Super Jolly delivered a much improvement over the MC2 in terms of taste. Taste-wise grinders, there's a lot of things to talk about them in terms of taste. So I guess we'll talk about that later. But so then afterwards, after from my Super Jolly, now I have my Eureka Olympus K. So that is a conical grinder with stainless steel burrs, and I could say, given with the size of the burrs, which I think is 71 mils, and conical blades and burns. So so the taste. So I could actually taste the difference, and I could tell that the shots tasted very different compared to my Matza Super Jolly. So that is my history of my espresso grinders. Also, in addition to my mainstream grinders, I also have a hand grinder, which I mainly use for filter. So I actually have one here with me. So so this is a Hario Slim. So it's got a handle. So you put the beans in here, and then it comes out here. So it's a bit dirty at the moment, so I might need to clean it. So these are also conical burrs. So they're made of ceramic. So if I just open up, you can just see. So you could adjust the grind size using this thing here. So it is a stepless adjustment. So speaking about stepless, apart from my DeLonghi and my blade grinder, all my espresso grinders are stepless. So these are my grinders so far, and I've been happy with them. Like, even with my DeLonghi, I'm happy that I used it because at least I got to know that there are some grinders which are more aimed at, like, let's say brewed, and maybe not necessarily espresso. So probably one thing that I would say, that not all grinders are good for espresso. So I guess the thing is, don't skimp on the grinder. So how about you, Ryan? So what's your grinder ownership history?
A lot shorter than yours. I have a Capresso Infinity. It's a conical stainless steel burr grinder, and I guess I skipped over the whole blade grinder thing, and I think a lot of people who may be just getting into coffee, who maybe just not as educated or into coffee about grinders is that they go for the blade grinder because it's very economical, and it grinds coffee, right? But I think in reality, a lot of people don't realize that it's not actually grinding; it's actually just chopping and cutting it up. And I think you've experienced that when you realize that it can't, once it chops up the coffee bean to a certain size, it can't finally chop it up anymore, and that simply isn't a fine enough coffee ground, so to speak, to make espresso. And because it's just really two blades at the bottom of a container that's spinning around at high RPM, and your coffee bean is like jumping around like jumping beans, and whatever hits the blade gets chopped up, right? So as you continue to use that grinder, it will, well, first off, the blades will wear out, I think, and then secondly, it's actually not going to get any finer than a certain point. And I think even for, like, if you're just using drip coffee, like it's good enough, but for espresso, it just won't do espresso justice at all.
Yeah, I think that's true, because with espresso, consistency is the key. And because when you grind using a blade grinder, basically, like, as soon as you hit the button, the longer you leave the blade grinder running, the more finer the coffee is. But because time is so varied, so as you say, like, so whenever the bean hits the blade, that's when it gets chopped up. But you cannot really actually guarantee, like, you cannot guarantee that after running the grinder for 5 seconds, you would always get the same consistency as a Burr grinder. So I think that is one of the disadvantages why most people would want to stay away from blade grinders when they want to use it for espresso, or if they're really into drink coffee.
That's right. Yeah. And another thing about the blade grinder is that it actually will heat up your coffee grind. So, and you don't want to start applying heat to your coffee before you even start brewing it, right? So, I mean, I personally haven't experienced a blade grinder because, I did some research and I moved on into the Burr grinder immediately. And, that's the current grinder I use, the Compresso Infinity. And that's probably the reason why I skipped over, the whole blade grinder thing, is because it just, it chops it up, but it doesn't have enough of a grinding range from, if you want something a little coarser, that's, for drip, or you want something like a French roast, or you want to go really fine for something like an espresso. The Burr grinder, even though it's a stepped grinder, it's at least a step up from the range that it's able to, grind the coffee bean, right?
Yeah, I think like, even with Burr grinders, I think if they're stepped or stepless, at least it could grind consistently.
Yeah.
I think that's the key with the Burr grinders. But the stepless or the stepped grind adjustment, I think there's not really much. I don't think it would actually have much of an impact in terms of the grind quality, but it just means that the range is different.
Yeah. And I think just to quickly explain stepped and stepless, so for anyone who doesn't know what that means, so on stepped grinders, when you make an adjustment to your grind size, when you want to go finer or when you want to go coarser, usually there's like an adjustment ring, or you turn the hopper, or you turn a handle. And what happens is that when it's stepped, it actually clicks into place. So like when you move it from, say, for example, your course is, from a 5 to a 4, when you move that step, it'll actually click into place. Whereas a stepless grinder adjustment is that there's no step, there's no click. So might go from like a 5 to like a 4.85, like it's a very smooth adjustment, and you don't get that click, click, click step, which allows you to have better control of the fineness of your grind, and you can really, really dial in the grind of your espresso ground, and that will actually make the biggest difference in terms of how you pull a shot, and your shot time and your recipe, right? So that's what stepless and a step grinder means for whoever might be wondering.
Yeah, and I think with stepless and stepped grinders, I think most people in the commercial environment, they may from the grinders that I've seen in cafes, most of them seems to be stepless because the baristas will tend to want to have more control over the grinds. So let's say, for instance, on matzo grinders, they are stepless, and you just turn the big adjustment ring, which is just underneath the hopper, and even a slight change. So let's say if you turn the adjustment ring anti-clockwise or clockwise by a notch, that could affect the grind. So that could affect the grind massively. Whereas the stepless, because everything is all predefined by the manufacturer, so there's not as much control. But saying that wouldn't really still be considered as a drawback.
Yeah, it's not a drawback. It's just, at least having stepless, I think it's more of an advanced feature for anyone who's really into dialing their grind size, and mainly it's really for espresso, right? That's where the sensitivity of grind size will actually come in, and that's where you will generally require more control and finer control of your grind sizes, where the stepless grinders come into play. So there's so many factors in a grinder, and it's the important thing to know is your grinder. If you're really serious into coffee and you want to start brewing at home, whether you want to do drip, whether you want to do AeroPress, or even of course you want to do espresso, that grinder is like the foundation of your coffee, because whenever you buy coffee bean, you're going to need to grind it, right? You need to grind it with something, whether you use a blade grinder, a hand grinder, or a Burr grinder. You still need to grind the coffee. So why not build a nice foundation for your coffee ground, so that you can have some of the adjustments, right? So it really depends what brewing method you like as well, and I think that will help you determine what type of grinder that you should look into. And of course, if you're like us, you get into coffee and you love coffee so much, you're gonna like to explore different types of brewing methods, and that's where that grinder versatility will come into play with those Burr grinders.
And for people who are thinking to go into coffee, and and getting a grinder, it would be one of the things where you wouldn't really upgrade as much. So if you go top for your grinder, you wouldn't have to upgrade as much later on. So let's say if it was like me, where I started with many machine, where I started with more than where I had more than one machine, I had to keep upgrading my grinders. But if you just go for the top, or at least for something that could keep you going for a while, I think grinders is one of the things which you wouldn't really where you wouldn't really want to buy more than a handful of times.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, grinders can get really expensive as well. And I think, that's a factor for me, is of course price, right? Like, I can't afford, a few $1,000 type of grinder where it's like commercial grade. And of course, it would be nice to have for someone who's more of a coffee enthusiast, but you know, in terms of the size of the machine and, you know, what I'm going to be using it for at home, like it's like overkill, right? So you try to find the grinder that fits you, fits your budget. Obviously, if it fits your usage, and of course it fits, you know, underneath your countertop if you want to put it on your counter, right? So but what we're trying to say is, like, you know, you want to purchase the grinder, the best grinder that you can afford. And for me personally, my recommendation is, you know, just skip the whole blade grinder thing. And you can get Burr grinders nowadays for quite affordable prices. I mean, you're not going to get like the really nice, consistent type of grinder that is stepless and that, you know, will do like literally talcum powder type of grinding. However, you know, with a Burr grinder, at least you're not chopping up the bean, and you're actually crushing and grinding the bean. And I mean, for a couple $100, $300 US dollars, you can get a decent one, at least for espresso, if that's what you want to be brewing, right? And I think that's, you know, the important thing is, you know, stay away from the blade grinder first, as, you know, Alex here, you kind of had that experience before. It just does not cut it for a lot of brewing methods, right?
Yeah, so that was one of the reasons why I just went for a Burr grinder afterwards. Yeah, blade grinders, yeah, as you say, it grinds like, yeah, it's not consistent. And sometimes it could also get quite messy as well, because after when you grind, so let's say if you grind it a bit too fine, sometimes the coffee would actually want to stay in the container, and then you have to go and clean it, get some, and like get kitchen towel, and then have to clean that afterwards. And then if you leave the coffee in there, then it becomes stale. And if you use it again, then the stale coffee is going to mix in with the fresh coffee. So yeah, so all in all, just stay away from blade grinders.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about conical versus flat burr. So I have only had, of course, one grinder, and it's a conical stainless steel. But have you ever used the flat burr grinders, or owned a flat burr grinder, or are any of your grinders flat burrs?
So my Super Jolly was a flat burr, so it's a 64 mils flat burr grinder. So that is my first. I wouldn't say it's my first commercial-based grinder that I used, and I used that for quite some time before upgrading to my current Eureka Olympus K. So in my opinion, I feel that flat burr grinders are more. I wouldn't say that they're more fussier than the conicals, but you need to get the grind absolutely spot on. So I would say flat burrs are not. They can still be forgiving, but I say it's not as forgiving as the conical grinders. When I say forgiving, I mean basically it would be easier to dial in. So with my conical grinder, I find it's slightly more easier to dial in the bean. So when I say, so for those who are unsure what dialing in the grinder means, it means, so when you use a new bean, let's take espresso for an example. When you want to find what is the best grind quality to get the best out of the coffee. So in terms of espresso, I would want to be able to run my espresso for the optimum amount of time. So let's say for 25 seconds, and I would want to be able to get a 2-ounce shot in that time, or if we're talking in terms of weight, possibly about 28 grams. So dialing the grinder is to try to be able to get the best yield out of your coffee. So yes, I find that a flat burr can be a bit more fussier to dial in, but not something where you would start or where you would want to start pulling out your hair. But that is what I noticed between the two types of grinders.
So what you mean, I guess, when you say fussy with a flat burr, is that when you make the adjustment, it's harder to get dialed in. Like you want to go finer, but then you go too fine, and then you want to coarsen it out, but it's very difficult to make minor adjustments. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so basically I would, so if I'm dialing in, so when I'm making adjustments, sometimes I would, so sometimes I say, yeah, so sometimes I would probably grind it a bit too coarse, then I would have to grind, and then I could end up grinding it a bit too fine. So sometimes, so you would need, so sometimes to find that sweet spot can be, I find that it could be quite, it may not be, it would be not as easy to, it wouldn't be as easy to find. But saying that, that could be possibly due to the nature of the Matsu grinders, because if you see the adjustment ring, it's a big ring, and sometimes you could end up grinding coarser or finer.
I see. Yeah, I find that for anyone who doesn't know, I guess the flat burr, what it means is that it's basically two grinding materials. Like you got your burr on the bottom, and then you got your burr on top that goes on top. And when you make the adjustment, it goes spaced out or it gets closer together, and that's where you get the fineness in grind. And the flat burr is actually like two flat pieces that go together, and it has a space in between, and it spins, and that's where you get your grind from. Whereas a conical is more like a ring piece on the bottom, and then you kind of have like a cone shaped a piece on the top, and your coffee bean goes in, and it grinds that way, and that also moves up and down to adjust your grind size. So that's a really difference between conical and burr. So you actually found it easier on your Eureka Olympus K to adjust because you feel it's a conical burr grinder, or what?
I think it's because it's conical, and I think I just find it more forgiving. So when I say forgiving, I find that I may not need to actually adjust. So I find that the sweet spot range is a lot wider compared to a flat burr. So I think with a flat burr grinder, I find that the range for this sweet spot is a lot more narrow. So let's say in terms of notches, I'll say just within 5 notches. So that's what I found on my Matsu Super Jolly. Yeah. So sometimes I may need to keep adjusting, but for the conical, I find the sweet spot ranges a lot more wider, and I find myself I don't need to adjust as often.
Well, yeah, so that's very interesting, Alex, that you find the conical a little more easier to adjust, and that's good. So maybe when I look for a new grinder, maybe I'll look for the conical type.
Yeah, I think even though I say that conical grinders are good, but saying that is not to dismiss the flat burrs, because I think flat burrs do still have their place in still delivering good coffee. So for people out there, so people watching this, and I don't get me wrong, flat burrs are still good grinders, because there is a wide range of flat burr grinders which still delivers good espresso, and each at the good price points. And also one thing to mention about flat burrs is also the size of the burrs and also the power of the motor. So with flat burrs, the bigger the burr, so in general, the bigger the burr and the more power the motor has, the taste would also improve as well. But with the conicals, from what I've researched, anything that goes beyond the 68 mil range, so anything that is bigger than 68 mil, then the taste improvement would only be minute. So whether or not the grinder costs 1,000 pounds or maybe 1,500 US dollars. So let's say, and for a grinder that has a 68 mil, and for a grinder, let's say, for a grinder that costs £500 or 1,000 US dollars, and it has a 68 mil, I personally don't think the taste difference would be that great. All that would be different would be just in the convenience and just in the features that the grinder has to offer.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. The improvement and the grind quality and result you get from stepping up in terms of a price as you get higher, it's very marginal, and that's why I suggested earlier that you try and get the grinder that suits your budget the best. Like get the best that you can afford. Get the best that you can afford at the Burr grinder for the use of what type of brewing that you're going to be doing, right? So I mean, if you're never ever going to be making espresso and you don't like espresso, or you just have no interest in making espresso, like you can get away with a grinder that doesn't need to be grinding super fine bean, right? So get what you can afford, and just understand that as you get higher in price, the features get better and whatnot, but the results are very, very marginal.
Yeah, that is very true. So yeah, so I think in terms of the price point, and also get the grinder that you like as well, because and like, so let's say, be it if it's cosmetic, colors, or the number of features that it has, as long as it suits your budget and you like the look and feel of it, I think those, and also not to mention the grind quality, I think those are the important things when considering when purchasing a grinder.
Yeah. That's not. I mean, of course, that's subjective to people's tastes and whatnot. How it looks, the aesthetics of your grinder. Of course, there's really shiny ones, there's really low key ones, and I just think, yeah, the important thing is to get the best grinding quality for the money that you can afford. And you mentioned earlier about motor size and power in the motor. And it's important that we talk about that, because a lot of the grinders, when you look at them, they're rated at a RPM, like an operating revolutions per minute. And it's important to know, I guess most people think, oh, higher RPM, the faster it spins, it's more powerful and actually may grind better, or but that's actually not the case. You want something that has more grinding capacity in terms of the motor power with a lower RPM. And the reason is because, again, when you grind bean, it creates heat, right? And you don't want to apply minimal heat to your coffee while you're going through the grinding process. And I thought that was just an important point to make, because you mentioned about power and how big the motor is, right?
Yeah, that's true. Like, in regards to the heat issue, like that, and like the heat would actually could actually drastically affect. It could drastically affect the taste of the coffee, and so let's say it would also affect your adjustments as well. So let's say if you're grinding a lot of coffee, and then you end up heating the burrs in your grinder, you would notice that your coffee would either be running out too quick, because your coffee grounds are already hot, so hence there would be some sort of effect when the water passes through. Yeah, so I think that is why some manufacturers are also building in things into the grinders to cool down the grinders. So I know that there's one grinder like in the compact range. So I think the compact E10, I know it has a fan So the fan turns on. So the fan always spins just to make sure that the grinder is cooled.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I
it's
think
just to really prevent that heat being applied to your coffee, which is probably like I mean, in terms of the process of grinding bean is probably the #1 enemy to quality coffee being produced, right?
yeah. Yes. And so going back to the power and the RPM, I find that flat burrs, you need to have a high RPM and powerful motor, but with a conical, but saying that obviously the but with a conical, I think it's, as you say, Ryan, like when you need to have a lower RPM and but a more powerful motor, because obviously you don't want to, of course you don't want to end up heating up the grinds, but saying that you also want to have the maximum output with the minimal amount of time.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you can obviously have like a really slow RPM and but you would need more powerful motor in terms of wattage and the amount of torque that it can actually spin. And, you would just be grinding coffee at a really, really slow pace, right? So if you do have like, 200 RPM motor and it's like really, really slow, you'd be waiting there for a while just to get your coffee grind.
Yeah, I think it's just key in the commercial grinders where they need to deliver like a really quick output, and since they would be serving customers. But with home grinders, yeah, I think if you're willing just to stand there for a few seconds, I think your quality is still there.
That's true. Yeah, that's great. And when you moved over to your Eureka Olympus K, did you find like that was a major improvement between the Super Jolly?
Oh yeah, yeah. Because when I got the Olympus K, what I could say is that I found that my shots were notably more pronounced. So the clarity in the shot was a more clearer, so I was able to taste the flavor notes. And also I find that my shots are also a tad more sweeter. So that could be like due to how the Olympus how the conical burrs are grinding the coffee. Also I noticed that it grinds a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll say we're talking in seconds, like maybe like 2 or 3 seconds quicker. So that means I could make more shots in that time. And yeah, so taste difference, it was a big step up from a Super Jolly. So bigger burrs. So it was a bigger conical burrs. Yeah. So
Okay.
So I had a more clear shot.
So in terms of burr size, like, it's measured in millimeters, and that's the diameter of the burr because it's circular, right? So, I mean, you mentioned earlier that, you've had many grinders and of course they all have different burr sizes, but in general, do you find that what advantages will a bigger burr give you versus um, a smaller burr size, but maybe a better RPM and a better motor, a more powerful motor? Like, is there a balance and is there a comparison there?
I think it actually goes back down to the heat issue, but in terms of the taste difference, I think you would always want to go for a bigger burr because simply you would be able to grind more burrs at the same time. So each time when the burr spins, you would be able to grind more, and hence more coffee is being crushed at the same time. And plus with a more powerful motor, there is more power to crush those beans. If the grinder doesn't have that much power, then it wouldn't really do too well to crush those beans, and so hence you won't really have good grind quality in terms of it may not even be consistent so the grinds may not even be consistent. So you need to have like strong powers just to grind those beans. So, and also when you talk about small burrs, so let's say if you have small burrs but a powerful motor, I think without doubt you would end up heating your burrs very quickly, because you would have such small surface area to grind those beans, and since you are spinning it really, really fast.
Yeah,
And
the
I guess,
bigger, I guess it makes sense. It's like the bigger the burr, the more heat distribution and dissipation that it's able to, like the capacity of that is greater, right? So like I'm thinking back to like for people who know like cars, like you when you have a brake rotor and you apply the brakes on, when you're driving, the caliper squeezes a disc and that will create heat. That's inevitable. But the larger surface area of the brake disc rotor, and the thicker it is, it's able to handle, and the capacity to distribute the heat is greater, and therefore it'll operate cooler in a sense, right?
yes, I think that's a good. So I think that is a good analogy to make with grinders. So I think, as you say, so I think you're rightly to say lower RPM, higher, a higher power wattage.
Yeah. Now, I mean, with ceramic burrs and stainless steel burrs, like those are the two that I've really seen in the market in terms of the material that the burr is actually made out of. Can you speak to anything about that? Like, what are some of the advantages of ceramic or stainless steel burr, and, is one better?
I think from what I could gather is that I think it actually depends on your brew method. So from what I've seen, like I've seen people where they choose ceramic burrs for filter and stainless steel burrs for espresso. So I could remember reading like there is the Malconic the Malconic Varia. So it could come either in the stainless steel burrs or the ceramic. And forgive me if I'm wrong, I think the stainless steel is more designed for espresso, sorry, and ceramic is more for brewed. But I could be wrong with either two, because I don't because I mainly use, because most of my grinders are stainless steel and it's only my hand grinder that is ceramic. So I think that is the only difference, and why stainless steel is optimized is mostly used for espresso. I think it's just in the cutting power, if that makes sense, because stainless steel is quite sharp and it's quite hard as well, and it not only cuts up the bean and then it crushes it in the end. But for ceramic, I think it just crushes. So it just crushes the bean, and in that sense, that could possibly have a slight, maybe a really small effect on the resulting in the brew.
I see. Okay. So, I mean, if for anyone who's really into espresso, I guess maybe you start looking at stainless steel conical burr that's good size with a powerful lower RPM motor. I think is probably the best combination, right?
Yeah, and also not to confuse people further, but if you really and like, because you see, like the burrs in a grinder, they could also wear out as well. So let's say, like, so in commercial terms, so for home users, you don't really need to consider much, because if you have a commercial grinder in your own home, most likely you won't ever need to change your burrs unless if you go for a second-handed grinder. But saying that, some people have opted to go for the titanium burrs. So some grinders actually come in a titanium some grinders actually come with titanium burrs. So one example is the Eureka Mythos, and that is a flat burr grinder. And one of the advantages of a titanium burr is that it lasts very, very long. And that is practically the only difference. So once when you get titanium burr, you practically don't need to really change the burrs unless if you're grinding kilos of coffee like, almost every single day. Yeah, so even the Maxes, Matsu grinders, the Mini, Super Jolly, Major, they also have the titanium burrs available, but you'll need to change them.
Yeah, that sounds like a expensive modification.
But also they do look quite nice. I have seen photos, so they are sort of like golden, so they look quite they're golden burrs. So that's quite nice each time when you open up your grinder.
Yeah. So nice showpiece. It should have like a, a little window on the side of your casing of the grinder to show off, the titanium burr.
just to make the grinder look even nicer.
Yeah, but yeah, titanium's that makes sense because titanium's really, really, really hard and dense metal. So I can see why they would use that. Although it's very light. I wonder what the heat dissipation capacity of titanium versus stainless steel would be, because I think stainless steel would transfer heat quite easily, but maybe not as, aluminum's like even easier, but that's a softer metal. But like, do you know, like, are titanium burrs, do they transfer and dissipate heat better?
I'm not really an expert in metals, but from what I gather, I think since they do have quite a high price point, so I think they may be able to deal with heat better compared to stainless steel. But I think the main thing is their reliability. So as you say, they are a lot harder, they are a lot lighter compared to stainless steel. So I think it's just reliability. So in a reliability sense, possibly it may be able to handle the heat, maybe possibly better than a stainless steel burr.
Cool. Yeah, and the last thing I kind of want to touch upon with grinders is that while you're grinding and you want to make an adjustment to your grind size, it's important to know that because the way the burrs work, like I mentioned before, you got your bottom piece of the burr and then you got the top piece, and when you make the adjustment, it just goes closer together or farther apart, and that's where you get your grind size. It's important to know that when you're making an adjustment on a grind, say you're grinding at level 5 again, and now you want to go down to level 4 just to see, what the result would be. It's important that you make the adjustment while your grinder is actually grinding bean, and the reason for that is because if your grinder stopped and you make that adjustment, you're just literally pushing that grind closer together or farther apart, and when you grind the next time, it's actually going to be inconsistent with the grind that comes out of your grinder. Have you noticed the difference in grinding and making adjustments in that method while the grinder is actually running?
Actually, when I got my Super Jolly, I tried adjusting without running the grinder, and because of, as you said, of the inconsistencies, it actually stored my Super Jolly. So it actually caused the motor in the grinder to actually just to store and to stop. Then afterwards, and then when I adjusted it to be coarser, so the grind size, so when I adjusted the grinding size, I adjusted it coarser, and then I was able to start up back again. But saying that, I think it's only when you're making really big adjustments. So let's say if you're going down, like, I don't know, 10 notches finer, then obviously then you're going to run into issues because consistency you are drawing the birds closer together. But saying that to go deeper, but to go further on, it wouldn't be much of a matter when you go coarser. So you wouldn't really be stalling the grinder, but all that you would just be doing is you are just making the grind and the burrs, you're drawing them further apart. So in terms of taste, you may get a mixture of fine and coarse, which could possibly also end up affecting the taste in a way.
Interesting. Okay. Do you have any other comments about grinders and Burr grinders and everything?
I think probably just to end off, so just get the grinder that would suit your budget, the grinder that you like, and it's well established amongst other people. And as long as you're happy with it and it delivers a cup that you enjoy, then I think that's the key thing.
That's excellent. Yeah, I totally agree with that. So yeah, let's move on to our next topic. Today is about freshly roasted beans and actually how long they last for. You know, there's different opinions out there about how long freshly roasted beans actually last for. Some say 2 weeks, some say 3 weeks from the time you open your bag or the time from the roast date. But Alex, I know you've been home roasting yourself and roasting coffee beans that way. What's your experience with that? And, you know, what are your thoughts about how long freshly roasted beans actually last for?
I think freshly roasted beans, I think generally speaking, I think if you want to gain the peak flavor of your beans, you should at least you should enjoy them in no longer than 3 to 4 weeks. So in other words, just under a month. Because when you first roast coffee, the coffee would need to release the CO2. So it needs to degas. And because when you roast, it actually contains all the gas. So it contains all the gases from the roasting. So if you notice, so let's say if you bought a bag of coffee, freshly roasted, so it was roasted one day, and then if you leave it for a week, you can actually see that the bag expands, and that is because it degases, and as it degases, if there's too much gas, then you won't be able to extract much of that flavor. So let's say if you're putting espresso, you might see a lot of air bubbles in the espresso, or you might end up with a lot of crema because of the expansion of the gases and with the oils. But also it's saying that you don't want it to become stale where there's nothing left in the bean. So usually that takes up to a month. So I find that the prime time, so with espresso, I find that the prime time is anywhere between after 10 days and anything between 10 days and up to a month. And even towards the month, the coffee would still taste good. But they're saying that if you're really pushing yourself, you could actually still enjoy it within 2 months, but it won't. But you would have missed it. But the peak of that flavor would have gone. So that's for espresso, but it's a totally different story for brewed, because from what I could gather and from my own experience, after roasting the coffee, you could actually enjoy it straight after 1 day after roasting, because in the nature of the brewing methods of espresso and filter is more open, so hence you will be releasing the gases more rapidly compared to espresso. So yeah, so with filter, you don't need to wait for the 10 days. You could just enjoy it straight away, or like possibly even one day. Or if you're really going for it, you could even try it a few hours after roasting.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm the guy that goes into a roastery or a cafe, and that's more niche and more a local. And I'm the guy that looks at every single bag on the bottom of the bag of bean, and it was like, oh, okay, this was roasted like 5 days ago. Oh, this was roasted 4 days ago. Oh, this was roasted last week. Oh, look, this one's roasted yesterday. I'm gonna buy this one. So I'm the guy that goes through like almost all the bags looking for the freshest one, and it's just funny because my wife, thinks that I'm kind of crazy for doing that, but I'm the guy that wants the freshest bean because you want that optimal flavor and that optimal freshness from every roast, right? So have you ever done that?
Yeah, that is like, so let's say if I'm not roasting and I'm in a shop, I would also do the same because I don't want to buy a bag that has been roasted that has been on the shelf for 10 days. So let's say if I still have coffee left at home, I would probably want to get the freshest just so that I could use it just in time, just so when the peak flavors are just beyond reach. Yeah, but saying that if I find that I need to use coffee, but I find that if I need to use coffee straight away, so let's say if I'm running out on, so let's say if I'm running short on beans, I would actually do the complete opposite, and I would try to find a bean which has been roasted about 10 days ago, just so that I could start using the bean immediately. But if I'm buying a fresh new batch, I don't mind waiting. Then I would always go for the freshest. But saying that if I'm only drinking brewed, then I would just get the freshest anyway.
Yeah. And how long does I guess the term is actually off-gassing, when the gases expand from a freshly roasted bean, and I've heard that it's good to let it off gas for a certain amount of time, and I think you've just spoken about doing that the 10 days and for espresso, and you want to make sure that it's had its chance to let out this gas. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think degassing I think the process of just letting the bean to degas, I think that's vitally important because in my own experience, I have tried putting espresso shots with beans which have just been roasted like a day ago, and find that the taste is really flat, the flavor is really undeveloped. Yeah, it's just very bland. So I think the process of degassing also allows the flavors to develop, as well as for the flavor notes to develop, and just for the bean itself to not have much gas. But that's only for espresso. But for brewed, you could immediately drink it. Well, I find that you could drink it straight away, and you could get the flavors there pretty much. It's quite immediate.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So yeah, again, it's your method of brewing is going to dictate this particular topic here is fresh beans versus 1 week, 2 week old beans versus 2-month-old beans. So I guess you can buy your beans according to what your brewing method is. If it's going to be espresso, then it's okay to still buy beans that were roasted about 5-10 days ago, right?
Yeah, but saying that if there aren't any beans which are roasted like 10 days ago, it is still the best thing to still go for the freshest one. So basically the rule of thumb is always go for the freshest that you can. But if you know that you need to use the bean straight away and you really want to taste the bean, go for a bean which so go for the bean which was roasted like for me 10 days ago, but it really matters what you are using the coffee for. Yeah, and also try avoiding getting pre-grounds, because I know when you buy beans, some shops would actually offer to grind the beans for you. So that is one thing to be careful of, because as soon as one of the bean is ground, you're releasing a lot of those gases, and once one of those gases are gone, then your flavors won't be there anymore after a few hours.
Yeah, I've heard different different opinions about that as well, especially for espresso. That when you grind the bean, you have about, like, I've heard, like, you know, anything from specifically like 11 minutes to like 20 minutes to half an hour, and some I've even heard like 8 minutes. You know, I don't think there's a, you know, specific amount of time that, you know, every bean will, you know, lose its flavor or optimal flavor if you've grinded it, you know, X amount of minutes ago. But yes, it is important to use the freshest beans possible that you can find, if you don't have a choice, and just understand. And this was the other, you know, question I had for you, was that, you know, once you grind that bean, your time, you know, from finishing grinding to, you know, when you actually extract all those flavors, it's not long, right? I mean, it is probably within minutes, but it's not. Why you shouldn't buy pre-ground is that, you know, that's a particular reason, is because, you know, you're buying grinded beans that, you know, are from a week ago, 2 weeks, who knows, right? So, you know, it has already lost a lot of its gases, and of course, therefore, it's lost a lot of its flavor, right?
Yeah. So also with the pre-grinds, the person who is grinding the coffee for you, they won't be absolutely sure whether this grind would deliver the most out of the coffee that you're buying. So possibly they could be possibly grinding it at the wrong size for you. So particularly for espresso, if you're grinding it for espresso, if they're grinding it too fine and it's ending up choking your machine, then that's not very good. So the case with me when I had my DeLonghi grinder, I was kind of lucky with the guy. So I was quite lucky that he grinded a bit finer. So I was a bit lucky that he grinded it just right for me. So yeah, so with pre-grinds, try to avoid them unless if you're desperate and you really needed coffee and somehow your grinder broke down. But otherwise, always buy fresh, buy whole beans, and when you do grind your own beans, try not to let that window be too big. So as you rightly say, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter for X amount of minutes, like how you leave it long. But I guess the rule of thumb is use it as soon as you can. And I've heard people say you shouldn't leave it out for more than 15 minutes, half an hour or something.
Yeah, there's all these numbers that are you know, spoken of and you know handed out here and there, but I don't think there's really. I mean, if you want to get technical and about chemistry and whatnot, it's really, it depends, right? And it depends on every single species and kind of bean and how you roasted it and how much gas is left in and that bean went from the roasting process, right? So yeah, there's really no hard and fast rule for that, I think. And I think people, yeah, you're right, people just need to be cognizant that, you know, once you grind it, you know, every minute that goes by, that bean will start losing its maximum potential of flavor that's, you know, that you're able to extract from it.
Yeah, so don't leave it too long or it will go stale. and you don't want to drink stale coffee.
Okay, well, I don't have any further comments about this topic. I thought today's two topics kind of fit hand in hand. You got your grinder and then you got your fresh whole beans. So for anyone who has any questions about grinders or roasting coffee beans, please leave them in the comments below. And keep tuning into our show. We're gonna be uploading every week. And hopefully we can get a good schedule going for that, and hopefully that you've been finding value in our videos. Alex, do you have any other comments?
I think I just finish off with always enjoy good coffee and avoid stale coffee.
That's right. Yeah. So thanks everyone for watching, and hope you enjoy our video, and please subscribe if you like our video. Thank you.
Thank you.